Welcome everybody to the Integrated Reporting U.S. community. We've been convening these conversations for over 5 years now, and our goal is to shine a light on the ideas and practice behind both integrated thinking and reporting. And our program today takes that to the next step, which is actually embedding integrated thinking into the decisions that companies make. Before we get started, though, I want to just thank our operating committee. The financial support for our platform comes from BWD Strategic. That's Alex Gold, one of our operating committee members, and my company, Insight 7. And as an illustration of the great work of our committee, our program today has been organized and is going to be led by one of our operating committee members. Yeah, can't wait, Ken, to hear from you and your colleagues. And then, as always, we'll open things up for discussion after the formal comments are ready. So, Ken, thank you so much. And I'll let you introduce some of your colleagues as you go along.
All right, thank you. There's just two of us today. Peter Spence is with us online and on screen, and he's one of the masterminds of this project. And our colleagues Nancy Mark Thrasibule and Raluca Stroh are unable to join us this morning, so it'll just be Peter and I. So we're going to give sort of a flyover of this integrated performance management report. This is sort of an outline of from a longer presentation that we've scheduled for a webcast February 28th. The current business context is really essentially the shift from a shareholder perspective to a stakeholder perspective, which everybody sort of in this crowd is fully aware of, and this need for more ESG reporting. The need for change, I'll touch on some of the findings that prompted the research and cover the high points from our IPM report. Need for change. This slide just captures some of the kind of initial research that we found. 95% of employees don't understand the business strategy. 21% of average engagement among employees worldwide is a Gallup research. And 60% of organizations don't link budgets to strategy. That's also a Harvard Business Review finding. So this report is actually the product of phase 2 of this integrated performance management research that we've done in collaboration with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And the IPM phase 1 findings, we interviewed a lot of companies around the world, and we realized that it basically confirmed what we had suspected, that companies continue to struggle with employee engagement, empowerment, and accountability. There's often a silo mentality in many organizations, and budget just get cascaded, and the finance function gets involved in trying to manage resource allocation, and the silos really impair the effectiveness of that resource allocation. And incentives, to the extent that they're aligned with strategy, it really is just at the higher levels of the organization. So those are some of the findings, and another realization that was confirmed was that one of our initial hypotheses is that companies continue to be focused on financial capital more so than anything else, and we all know that's a tried and true finding. So anyway, so the research methodology, we conducted interviews with 25 executives from major companies around the globe. We had 7 roundtable discussions with over 50 participants, and we had several meetings with this steering group of World Business Council for Sustainable Development members, and they were instrumental in providing us feedback and as we refine this framework that we've developed. This slide just shows some of the companies that have been engaged in this. Petrobras, Givaudan, is a big company, and we've got a number of case examples embedded in the report from a handful of these companies. So what are we talking about? Integrated performance management. It's long-term value creation by integrating multi-capital drivers like environmental, social, human, and relationship into decision-making, thereby reducing risk and improving resilience, agility, creativity, sustainability, and trust in business. So, as Nancy or as Mary said, it really is about sort of integrating, these concepts into the decision making in organizations. So this is just we've developed a comprehensive model. This is sort of the overview, and at the top we've got overarching concepts and principles. In the middle we've got the framework components, and down at the bottom we've got management information, performance outcomes, and impact on business, and we'll step through each of these as we go forward here. Overarching concepts include purpose, strategy, and governance, and that's one of the things we heard loud and clear from our WBCSD steering group, was the importance of purpose that drives through the entire business, and so that was part of the feedback that we got from the steering group. They thought that was really essential, and basically what we're talking about is a framework that's geared towards successful strategy execution. The principles, in addition to the overarching concepts, we embrace the principles of taking a multi-capital, multi-stakeholder approach, a long-term value creation concept. And I know I'm preaching to the choir with this audience with those principles. So in terms of the components, the core components of the framework from the middle of the diagram address leadership, processes, performance culture, and resource management. And we'll run through each of these components in the coming slides here. The key components of the IPM framework, one of the key components of the IPM framework is a shift in leadership, including how the leadership composition is composed, the leadership team is composed, whether executive leadership is defined by functional expertise or strategic outcomes, who's responsible and accountable for strategic outcomes, whether ownership of strategic outcomes is fragmented or hard to pin down. That's one of the findings from our interviews with these major companies, is that the ownership seems to be unclear, ambivalent, and people don't, it's sort of fragmented. It's hard to identify who's really responsible for aspects of strategy, and also essentially, who's got the power in the organization in terms of resources. And we've kind of developed the IPM maturity model, which is an organizational self-assessment tool for the IPM framework, which is based fundamentally on the extent to which an organization is functionally focused or strategically focused. And I'll have Peter step through this idea of leadership composition and then this move from functional to strategic. Peter, you want to take it over from here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ken. That was a whistle-stop tour through the overall concepts. Thank you very much. Now, the other thing Ken said was that, I was sort of responsible for this, but not at all. We've been strongly led by all the companies that we've engaged with. So right from phase one, where I think we had 70 senior leaders in about 35 companies across 5 or 6 different countries. And also, of course, during phase 2 by the steering committee, and last but not least by my colleagues here at AICPA-CIMA. So it's been a real team effort. But thank you anyway. And just very quickly run through the idea of the shift in leadership or executive leadership composition and why it matters. So nearly all of the businesses that we've engaged both through phase 1 and phase 2 are structured along what we've described as functional silo hierarchies. So, I mean, this is just a quick and easy example of the sorts of functional hierarchies that we encountered, but it would vary by business, of course. And some of the issues that were raised, I've got on this pink box on the left here. So I guess these are disadvantages. So the predominant focus in businesses like this is a functional excellence focus. Now that doesn't sound like a disadvantage, but when you've got strategies to deliver and people are focused on their functions only, or largely on their functions, that can be to the detriment of the strategy. We also found that cooperation is hard to achieve between the necessary functions in the business. Accountability for results is shared, fragmented, or avoided, as Ken mentioned earlier. And then connectivity between operational activities and strategic objectives is often unclear. Talk a bit more about that later. And transparency of performance drivers increasingly opaque, especially lower down power hierarchies within these sorts of organizations. So next slide, Ken. There were a few businesses that we came across that operate a matrix management concept where some executives are responsible for both operational or functional responsibilities and or objectives, and some strategic, one or more strategic objectives or strategies. And these are described as a matrix style of management, or what we discovered later to be described as a weak matrix concept. So in this particular illustrative example, we've tried to show that the chief operating officer and the chief marketing officer perhaps have responsibilities for both, or have dual citizenship, as we've described in our paper. The strategies on the right in the orange boxes tend to be mainly focused on key or big strategic initiatives within or projects within organizations. So that tends to be the extent of it. So this clearly improves resource alignment with strategy to some extent, especially for those strategic projects. And for those few strategies or strategic projects that are managed in this way, improves accountability for strategic initiatives, encourages employee mobility for specific projects, processes, and activities. What we also found, unfortunately, were there some disadvantages that didn't exist within the silo structured businesses. So the organizations that operate like this tell us that they encounter more complexity with the resource allocation and management. Business as usual, which is everything outside of those few orange boxes that are managed this way, tend to remain siloed. And the one thing that struck us was that even in businesses where we have officers responsible for both strategic outcomes and for functional excellence, they tended to be biased towards their functional silos. So so even in these organizations, strategies didn't really feature large. Next slide, Ken. So then in further research that we did, we came across this concept of a strong matrix. We didn't actually speak to any businesses that were operating in this way, but we did find that there were examples of businesses, mainly in the high-tech sector, that had started to experiment with this kind of structure to try and improve focus on strategy. So essentially what this means is quite a significant shift in the emphasis or the roles within the executive team. So we would expect, whereas in the previous diagram we found that there was some shared ownership between strategic and functional responsibilities, in the strong matrix, we have elevated to the executive team executives who are solely responsible for one or more strategies and who do not also have maybe functional silo responsibilities. So we also came up with this idea that the business as usual, or the functional silos, were essentially there to serve the strategies or the demand side. So we have the supply and demand concept with the CEO in the middle, supported by the COO and the CFO in this example, as mediators between the two sides of the business. Now, what this essentially means in this context here is that the needs of strategies are prioritized much more so than either of the other two models that we spoke about just now. And there are more advantages to this. So the power hierarchy within the whole organization would be determined by the strategy. So clearly we talked about the strategic executive officers being responsible for one or more strategies, but also for all of the initiatives, processes, activities, projects, etc., that support that in a value chain under each of these strategies as well. So it sort of marks a shift from dual citizenship to a much clearer accountability for strategic outcomes. And resource allocation is determined by strategy, not entirely, but predominantly. Clearly, you do need business as usual, but at least in this model here, the strategies are directly resourced underneath the strategic executive officers. We also found, especially from the steering committee, that transparency of the performance drivers was absolutely critical to people being able to take responsibility for challenging initiatives, and also for them to be able to understand how the business works, to gain that line of sight between what they're doing and the success of the business, what we call line of sight. This process also enabled democratization of information and decision-making, something which siloed businesses find really hard to do. They find trust in their employees quite difficult to endow, but through this process, it's made possible. And these initiative teams are multidisciplinary and dynamic, again, due to the transparency of the process, the line of sight, encouraging people to move around the business, to join forces and to collaborate across functional silos of expertise. But unfortunately, we didn't overcome the problem of resource management complexity. So how is this actually implemented? So you might be thinking, well, this is quite a big step, going from a way of managing businesses or management philosophy that's over 100 years old now, which is basically command and control, to an organization that is strategy driven, where you have accountability cascaded throughout the organization, and decision making taking place at every level within the organization in a culture of openness, transparency. And the way that we've come up with is that there's a three-step process which is repeated indefinitely, frankly. First, to establish the structure, the strategic structure, but also to refine it over time. So not a once and done, but something that continues essentially all the time to drive continuous improvement and refinement in strategic execution. So, and this came from every single business we spoke to, basically the finance leaders telling us that they struggle with something called a goal cascading process, which for some reason or another, they tend to repeat annually, where finance is basically responsible for trying to understand the connections between operations and strategic outcomes or strategic objectives. And they struggle with the complexity of the process. Another aspect of this is they very often readily accepted that they didn't have the level of knowledge that operational leaders within businesses have about operations, and therefore, they're fear-making changes. They're fear-making decisions related to resource allocations to prioritize different activities or new activities. And therefore, quite often, they struggle to resource new ideas in businesses like this. And there's a McKinsey study out that we came across as well, that businesses that aren't able to flex quickly to change to external changes and changing circumstances tend not to perform as well as those that do or can. So this transfers responsibility and accountability from the finance function to the strategic executive officers. Now, bearing in mind that the resources are aligned with strategies, there is an incentive for the supply side or the business as usual operations to find themselves useful to strategies to continue to be resourced. So I'll just run through very quickly the steps. The first step is something we found many businesses do anyway, so not really anything new that many businesses will be doing, where activities around the businesses will be asked to identify the strategies or strategy that they mostly support. That would give a strategic executive officer or SEO visibility of all of the activities within the business that are linked to the or supposedly adding value to their strategy or strategies. Because they've taken this step, they'd also be able to assess the cost of all of these initiatives within their strategies. The second step would be to make the connections between the initiatives that have been mapped to these strategies. So between each of these, all of these initiatives within the strategies, there should be connections. Otherwise, essentially they'd be stranded. And finally, to assess the impact of each of these initiatives relative to each other, to these strategies. And it sounds like a lot of work, and I expect it is, but if you take a view that this could happen over a number of years, where the responsibility is ultimately the SEO's responsibility to achieve, but obviously that responsibility can be cascaded as and when these connections are made to strategy, to all of these initiative owners. So it's not something that is the responsibility of finance or operations or any individual strategy director or any of these senior leaders. It can be cascaded around the business. Next slide. So in terms of resource management, I alluded to the idea that in a strong matrix organization, strategies are allocated, budgets or resources are allocated to strategies. So this means that SEOs are accountable for allocation within their strategies. They're also accountable for the outputs and the outcome measures and targets. And because both budgets and outputs are the responsibility of the SEO, you can agree productivity measures and targets, which can be used to improve productivity over time as well. So next slide. This here is what we call the initiative attributes table. So each initiative within a strategy should have a data set that looks something like this. And this is responsibility of each initiative owner. So again, you would expect that to be cascaded around the business for every single initiative. And I mentioned earlier that the three processes are initially to map to a strategy, to connect to initiatives that are within that strategy, and to discuss and ascertain the impact of each of these initiatives relative to each other that supports the strategy. Essentially, what you're doing is you're building and documenting strategies' value chains here. Of course, they've got a number of other measures that can be populated over time. And what this enables you to do is to eventually be able to discuss with quite a degree of robustness, I think, your value chain, which is a key element of your business and operating model within the business. So this is where you get your information from. So gone will be the days of you arriving at year end and wondering how you describe your business and operating model to external users of your annual report or your integrated report. Because all of your information will be derived from these attributes initiative tables. Okay, Ken, this is over to you now for the next section.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. You know, you know, when we're doing this research and talking to all these companies, you know, we sort of were thinking about, you know, what sort of an organization do you have to create in order to be successful at doing this, and you know, so we identified these 7 attributes of a performance culture, and these 7 attributes are having a performance mindset, a strategic focus and accountability, having line of sight and engagement, enabling controls, transparency and visibility, cooperation and coordination, and being data-driven. So I'll step through each of these in the next couple of slides here and just highlight some of the key characteristics. The first component of a performance culture is a performance mindset. And you know, what we say that is a quick way to explain is when, you know, back to this idea of having a clear business purpose. It creates a mindset that influences work behavior and drives strategy execution. And when employees embrace that organizational purpose, they can have a sense of individual purpose, and that creates a performance mindset that leads to confidence and engaging with the business and executing on the strategies of the organization. The second component is having a strategic focus and accountability. This involves using the 3-step process that Peter just talked about, and mapping strategic initiatives and moving towards that strategic, more towards a strategic focus rather than a functional excellence focus. And mapping these improves accountability. You know, it also provides a clear line of sight and improves resource allocation, facilitates employee engagement by having this line of sight, and you know, consistent interpretation of strategy. That's one of the things that we found when we were talking to businesses, is that you know, there are a lot of different interpretations of strategy, because it sort of got lost in the filtering process as it was transmitted down through the organization. So other components of a performance culture are fostering enabling controls over coercive controls. And what we're talking about here is enabling controls allow some flexibility and adaptability versus, you know, we're talking about a no blame culture, as opposed to coercive controls are you know, very compliance oriented and create a culture where fear of failure inhibits people from taking responsibility and taking initiative and being making decisions about what the work that they're doing. Transparency and visibility serves to clarify the purpose, values, and strategy of the organization, as Peter was talking about as we were going through this, and it also contributes to the ongoing refinement of strategy. If everybody sort of agrees on you know, the strategy and values of the organization, there's also the refinement of strategy that takes place in the cross-functional collaboration and conversations that enhance decision-making. Being data-driven is essential to effective decision-making in any of today's competitive business environment, and you know, that's essential to any business these days. The maturity model, Peter mentioned, or I guess I mentioned that earlier, is designed to enable businesses to position themselves at different stages of their journeys to adopting an IPM approach. And we developed this so companies could take a look at where they are on this maturity model and sort of decide, you know, which new initiatives they wanted to adopt and what they wanted to identify going forward. Basically, what it does, it takes the components of leadership, culture, and resource management and breaks them down into 21 indicators on this continuum of functional excellence to strategic execution. And these descriptors, these indicators then sort of translate into descriptors of a type of organization, like we see across the top row there: traditional organization, evolving organization, an advanced organization, or an integrated organization would be kind of at the far right, which is really heavily oriented towards strategic execution as opposed to functional excellence. Clearly it's not a one-size-fits-all model, and it's unlikely that any organization would find themselves really embedded deeply into one column. They're probably more likely to be spread across some of these indicators, depending on leadership, culture, resource management. This is just a snapshot of the leadership component of the maturity model, and across the top you can see primary focus on function. Evolving organization has a strategic focus within functions, back to the kind of the weak matrix to the strong matrix concept. Advanced organization would have a strategic focus within the function, supported by strategic program leaders, which is one of the things we found from our research, was that many organizations, maybe they didn't call them strategic executive officers as we have in this document, but have program managers, program leaders for aspects of strategy. So that's a summary of the culture and the maturity model. Peter, you want to sort of talk a little bit about the performance and management information?
Yep, sure, no problem. So these we describe as the framework outcomes. So they are performance and management information. So starting with management information, just to make the point that this is about informing management as to the extent to which the framework has been adopted and the quality of its adoption. So that enables you, coupled with the maturity model, to understand where you are in your journey towards the implementation of IPM, and also to plot your way forward using measures to set targets for SEOs and others within the business to take you to where you want to be within the maturity model. So it's specifically not about the management information about the business, which of course will vary business by business. So we felt that having this management information would enable leaders around the business to be able to control the implementation of IPM within their organizations. Performance is essentially about employee engagement, employee empowerment, and trust. These are really important factors because our entire framework hinges on people, the decisions they make everywhere within the business. One of the concepts we came across in the traditional command and control structures is that senior executives sort of suffer an illusion, if you like, that they're in control of the whole business, when in fact, on an everyday basis across entire organizations, people are making business decisions all the time. So how do they know at senior levels whether those business decisions are being made in the best interests of the business, using the best information available to each of these decision makers around businesses? And we believe that, and we found that, further down hierarchies, these decisions probably don't align, or in fact, we know don't align, and don't inspire people either, because they don't fully understand the strategy. So IPM is all about trying to make sure that people have that information, have the power, have the trust, and are engaged with strategy. So I guess the benefits of the framework here, you can all see the slide here. It supports businesses to be more resilient and more sustainable by improving their performance through enhanced workforce engagement with strategies. And given that strategies are a lot more complex these days because of the inclusion of ESG ambitions, we believe that, and there is no systematic way that we found through our research that this can be embedded within organizations. We believe that IPM is a first. It helps develop a performance culture. We spoke about that, or Ken spoke about it, where people are empowered, trusted, and engaged, driving strategy and creating value. And when we talk about strategy, hopefully for most businesses, we're talking about multi-capital, multi-stakeholder, long-term view of strategy. Guides businesses towards multi-capital, multi-stakeholder approach to strategy execution, creates greater clarity on who is accountable for achieving objectives at every level within the organization. So no longer the fragmentation that we found, or the pass the baton mentality, or sloping shoulders mentality that we found through our research that some businesses experience, but a very clear line of accountability throughout the organization. And develop strategy engaged workforces and cultures that align with purpose, mission, and vision. And finally, improves management information and we're talking about IPM management information by providing greater insights into how activities, processes, or projects contribute to strategy. Over to you, Ken.
So some of the key takeaways, as Peter said, this is a long-term process, a long-term undertaking, not a project. Needs to be led from the top. Leadership composition and ownership is key to this implementation. And culture change will take time in any organization. So a lot of major steps to be taken and embedded into an organization. So from us, our next steps, it's conceptual at this stage. We've got conversations going on with the World Business Council. We're talking about implementation and potential deep dives into the framework components. And here's just a set of links to the landing page for the reports and some of the documents. The maturity model and the attribute table have separate separate sites on the pages on the landing page, and the initial report is also available there for anybody that's interested in looking at that. So that is all we have in terms of presentation. So we'll open it up for questions, and you want to direct traffic, Mary?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Thank you very much. That was great. It's a very rich paper. So that was a good overview that gave us a very nice feel for the depth of your analysis. We do have had requests for the slides, so I assume we can get those and I can distribute those.
Yep, I got them downloaded into a PowerPoint. I can pop it to you right after we finish.
Yep, and I'll distribute that to folks with the videos. I have a million questions and comments, but I want to open it up. Does anybody have feedback, questions, comments? I'm so excited about this, and anybody please, unmute yourself or raise your hand if you want to join.
And I'll stop sharing so we can see more people on the screen.
Okay, good. Yeah, feel free to turn on your cameras, folks.
Yeah.
What we're seeing in our work, we're doing something very similar to this. We're not calling it IPM, but that's one of the reasons I was so excited about it. And I think we are seeing a lot of influence from the tech industry, the way that you described, Peter, of the strong matrix, and folks bringing kind of an agile mentality to strategy of a continuous improvement. And it's a really exciting way, and having that in parallel with bringing in sustainability factors. So I think everyone here is thrilled that you included the multi-capital model in this. It's just so critical to being able to think in an integrated way. So thank you so much for that. Anyone else? We got a message. Yeah, Elizabeth, chime in.
I just want to express profound gratitude. As a business professor, you've given me such a workable framework for the direction that business education needs to go. I'm hoping I think you said you're going to be developing case studies to go with it, to help students see what these ideas actually look like in practice. That would be very helpful. And then one question I had is how do you link this then to reporting and conveying this in existing sustainability reporting and other formats?
We really sort of didn't delve into the reporting, but I think the extent to which you can identify the components of a multi-capital framework and connect it better to strategy, and identifying KPIs for what you're actually doing in your business, I think that really lends itself well to having more and better information about reporting your progress on your multi-capital strategies and progress on sustainability fronts.
And there's just to follow on from you, Ken. This company always sticks in my mind. Huge global technology business that does produce an integrated report. That basically the senior finance people in the meeting with us basically told us that, yeah, we produce this integrated report every year, but we don't do anything internally. There's no management information and decision making internally. So we get to the end of the year and we wonder what to put in it. And further to that, they said that you feel that you haven't managed your way towards a position where you feel confident that you're driving that which you're reporting in your integrated report. So that's probably something that we that drove this whole project right since 2019.
Anyone else? Staff is welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I've actually sort of been connected and supportive of the work that AICPA-CIMA, particularly Peter and Ken, have been doing on this project for a number of years. So, I'm quite familiar with the framework and the principles. So, one of the things, I suppose, just reflecting, one of the things Peter and I have been discussing is, obviously this is a very sort of practical, important piece of work from the perspective of operationalizing strategy and sort of really enabling sort of the execution and sort of the management side of embedding sustainability programs, and then also how those sustainability programs sort of draw on intangible assets that are important in organizations, whether it's human capital, R&D and innovation, etc. So that multi-capitals model, as you mentioned, so it's quite unique in that perspective. But one of the things that we sort of I'm trying to think about as well is how to position this in relation to obviously the attention that integrated thinking has got through the integrated thinking principles, which is now, of course, under the IFRS Foundation. And obviously those principles are still in their sort of version 1 format. And I believe we've had a presentation on those principles some time ago from the value at the time. I think it was the Value Reporting Foundation, but of course that all got folded up into the foundation. So there's a lot of connectivity, I think, between those principles and the IPM work. I in the next iteration of the IPM work, I can see there being sort of even more kind of connectivity to those principles, and I actually see those principles, the integrated thinking sort of principles, as almost being more focused at that sort of board level in terms of the enabling the integrated thinking that goes on in boards in terms of their accountability and oversight. That's the way I've been sort of thinking about it. But that's the kind of sort of one of the important next steps, I think, is he's trying to navigate and bring this forward in a very sort of, you know, bringing it to companies and particularly our constituencies of professional accountants are working in business, you know, finance and accounting professionals, so they can actually get benefit from a sort of very sort of coherent and systematic framework for thinking about operationalizing and executing strategy. So I think it's really, really excellent work. So thank you for the presentation today, Peter and Ken.
Yeah, great.
Just to follow from what you're saying, Stathis, the whole project has been a public benefit, public interest project. There's no IP involved. Anybody can take it and use it for whatever they want at any point in time. And the idea is to try and for that to encourage people to get stuck in and use it the way they want to use it and potentially also adopt it.
That's great. Yeah, I think Stathis, thank you for making that connection, the integrated thinking. You know, a lot of that is written that framework is written as an annual project almost. And this is, I think, so exciting because it's talking about actually integrating it into the daily work. So.
Yeah, actually, we had Jeremy Osborne, provide some comments on the report because he's now an AICPA-CIMA, employee, and if you take a little closer look at the overarching concepts, integrated thinking, I think this, operationalizing this using the IPM framework is really sort of is operationalizing integrated thinking, right? It's sort of, kind of getting the organization to think about something besides the profitability, so.
Well, and more not just thinking about it, but as you say, empowering people to use that information when they're making a case for something, because I think that's the disconnect you hear is that folks, when it comes time to approve the funding for something, it goes right back to finance. And nobody's equipped to have the conversation that needs to happen.
And that's also a really important point that didn't come out of our presentation, but certainly is in the paper. We found that businesses will tend to operationalize strategic ESG objectives where there's also a financial benefit. Where there's a clear link to either cost cutting or being able to promote something as being green or whatever, so by, as you say, integrating or making people responsible for both, financial capital as well as the other capitals in their day-to-day operations, you get rid of that tension because, that you can't get, you won't be rewarded if you don't get or if you don't achieve all of your targets. If you have ESG targets, operational targets, and financial targets, you can't just say, well, I'll focus on the financial targets, because there's a strategy to implement more than those.
I don't want to put you on the spot. John Widener is here. He and I had some really interesting conversations. He's a human resources, human capital, I don't know what the best word is, person, and saw a lot of interesting parallels here with the thinking in that sphere. And of course, as you said, it's about employees. So John, I don't know if you.
Yeah, I figured you'd put me on the spot, Mary, when I showed up. Yeah, kudos to a lot of this from my perspective. First of all, leading with the word purpose, which became the most important word coming out of the COVID, which drove, I think, so much of the Great Resignation, all the change in jobs. People are still changing jobs. Engagement, as you know, from the Gallup polls, way the hell down. And so purpose to me, beginning with what the mission of a company is, why does this company exist? And then tying that understanding to what an employee does in their little microcosm of work is imperative. I mean, that's classic performance management at its core. And getting finance and HR to work together, usually oil and water, is also really important. I think that, you know, for too long, we see the world through different lenses and aren't very good at sharing that different perspective. And I think this ties that together well. That said, there are elements from a traditional HR performance. Let me rephrase that. From the most modern version of performance management, shall I say, because it's certainly not traditional anymore, that it gets left out. To me, performance management sits at the core of everything talent organizationally. Not only does it define my job as an employee and what my goals are for the year, but it does other things too. It spits out data that leads to succession planning, that leads to workforce planning. In other words, what kind of talent do I have in this organization? How strong is my team? Can it accomplish what needs to be accomplished based upon who I have? You know, at the end of the day, it's a sports model. You know, how strong is your football team and where's your strengths and weaknesses? And everybody has a job to do, and my tight end's not very good. Those of you who are maybe football fans, I'm sorry to use that with the Super Bowl coming up, but and all the other planning that goes into the people strategy of the organization. And the only place where I struggled a little bit was the org chart where HR and finance were in the same box, which is fine in terms of a planning process, but leaving them out of that strategic part, I don't know how you can do strategy without a people strategy. And that to me was left out. Again, maybe there's more to this. I haven't read, I admit I haven't read gotten through the entire study. For me to sit down and get 40 pages during a workday read is not always easy for me. But those are just some things, you know, off the top of the head that I would put out there. I think it's a great thing to get out there. It's for me to get human resources tied into the finance function and to bring it more central is awesome. I don't think HR is particularly left out anymore. I think the world changed a hell of a lot over the last 2-3 years, and what my colleagues in corporate did was hero-like in terms of holding businesses together. So, because there's no place else to turn. But enough. I've said enough.
Yeah,
Actually,
thanks.
that's yes. Thank you for those observations, and you know, that's one of the things we found in our initial phase 1 research was this sort of disconnect between the, you know, finance functions and the HR functions, and you know, you sort of got separate roles and not much working together on strategy, and you know, this report really gets, you know, in the connectivity between the strategy and strategic objectives, and you know, connectivity down through the employee to get them engaged in the strategy. But you know, the idea of an HR strategy to support this, you know, that's sort of a bottoms up to how do you sort of really support an organization that is kind of undertaking you know, a transformation like this. You know, Peter, you have thoughts about this HR strategy? I noticed I think I saw you making a note.
Well, I mean, John, those are really good observations. I mean, particularly the one where finance and HR don't speak the same language or talk to each other in businesses. And it's, you know, for us, that's just an anathema, because our entire IPM framework is based on human capital. That's the 90%. That's the secret sauce, if you like. And the whole framework is geared towards trying to engage human capital, if you like, or human resources, or just talent, with organizational ambitions, and to have that alignment between effort and ambition. So, right from the very, very beginning of phase one, we made it very explicit that it's people that make decisions. We're not yet living in a world where AI is making decisions. This was before AI anyway, but even now, it's still people, and people are, the difference, frankly. And if you don't engage your people, and when we talk about engagement, we're talking about people being engaged with the business's ambitions. If you can't engage them in a way that is aligned, then you're never going to improve your overall business performance. So that's absolutely key. And I'm sorry if we didn't have HR as part of the executive team, but it could be the operational director, or with the, different businesses will structure their executive teams in different ways. And the diagrams that we put in there are just simple for simplicity's sake, to be honest with you. So far from relegating the chief people officer to somewhere else within the hierarchy, they would be absolutely fundamental to this actual framework working.
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to stake a claim for HR silo in the organization at all, because in point of fact, my entire career in HR has been focused on making sure that my end role beyond advisor was to provide tools for management. I don't manage performance in an organization. I provide tools to help manage performance. I don't manage succession planning. I provide tools to help managers make decisions around succession. And I think that HR has always made that mistake of staking its claim to its silo. We own this, we own that. And the worst thing they can do is say we own performance management, which in too many organizations they have. And of course, that's not the case. Who manages performance in an organization? Management. So at the end of the day, I'm not trying to stake that claim. I was just adding the other pieces in, I guess, that you get to pull out of performance management, which I think are important and at some point worth recognizing as this rolls out, because I think it's a nice structure. I like it. And you're starting off in the right place from any HR perspective. Yeah, again, word purpose, huge. Performance management is core. So.
Thanks, John. We're just about out of time. I want to thank you so much for this work, for sharing with us. Any last words, Ken, Peter? I hope this is the first of several conversations.
No, happy to come back when we talk, get more in execution, and what we're hearing from people that are actually trying to implement, the framework,
Great. Peter?
No, nothing from me. Thanks very much, Mary. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you so much, and thanks all for joining us. And yeah, we'll keep the conversation going. So have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks all.